Alexander, we're standing out at your parents' homestead, correct?
Yes.
And what can you tell us about this building behind us?
Well, this is where I lived for 29 years. I enjoyed every moment of it, and it was a special treat and experience for us.
And what did the inside of the house look like when you were raised here?
It was all like the walls had like uh, tablecloth on it, and they were all painted, and the ceiling had ceiling paper over it. And it was real nice inside. Walls, every room was painted a different color.
What was your bedroom painted?
Uh, Towards the end, it was a light purple, and the other bedroom also was a purple. Living room was a light green. Kitchen was a pink, and the entryway was a pink.
And when you were a child, was there anything particularly fascinating about this house that you can remember?
Not not really back then because we didn't know it was going to become famous at one time or another, and it was just fun and enjoyable living here.
And what kind of upkeep does a sod house need?
About every 2 3 years or so, we had to put ground over the roof and make sure that it wasn't leaking. And outside of that, the walls pretty much stayed the same. So
What about the inside walls? Did you ever have to do anything with that?
just paint them about every 4 or 5 years. My parents would paint them, and that's about all.
Okay. And did your parents ever have visitors out here?
Oh yes, we had company from almost all the time, and there was tourists here from I think every state except Alaska that we didn't have here. So
Um, and when it was still in operation, when the house was still, everybody was still living here, what kind of animals did your family raise?
we had cattle. mm, That was basically the major ones for that, and then we had cats and dogs.
Any chickens or
Oh yes,
poultry?
chickens too, geese.
Um, and so your family were they self-sufficient, would
Yes.
you say?
Oh, we had hogs also. So
What about any fields or crops?
yeah, there was some oats planted and some wheat.
Did you
Uh,
have to help out in the fields?
yes, I did.
And what kind of things did you do?
I'd help planting and working summer fallow, fakes and fence. It was the regular farm chores that I had to help with. So
And what other kinds of chores did you
milk
have?
cows, feed the cattle, feed and water the pigs, and the chickens, like pretty much every farm, I guess. So
Was any of it ever enjoyable or more difficult than?
it was all enjoyable. In winter time when there was a lot of snow and stuff, it got to be a little hard and to work it all. But we were used to it. We just did it and enjoyed it. I guess I had fun with it. So
And how did your family keep the house warm during the winter?
it was heated with coal.
Cool.
We had a kitchen stove in the kitchen, and then there was two heaters in the house too. And it was warm in winter and cool in summer. So,
And were there any particular activities that you or your siblings would do during the winter time to stay active?
hmm, just had a few snowball fights with the neighbor kids when they'd come over. The regular play ante over and kick the can and stuff like that. Just regular games that we used to play softball. When the nephews would come or some of the neighbor kids would come over, we'd sometimes on a Sunday or something we'd get a whole bunch of neighbor kids together and play softball. So
And how often were you able to do that?
yeah, probably over the summer once or twice throughout the summer where we'd get together with all the neighbor kids.
And what about school? Was it a long walk for you to go to school?
It was a quarter of a mile north of here. Well, I did walk up there, and then I think I was in the fifth grade when they closed the school, and then went to Kildare School, and we were taken over there with the school bus. So,
And uh, what was the school name?
well, it was called the Frank Hutmacher School because it was on the corner of our land. So, and then Kildare was Kildare Public. So,
Was it was it weird for you going from the Frank Hutmacher school into town?
Oh yes. I mean, on the country school here, there was a few neighbor kids, and when you got the Gilder ones, there was a triple the amount of kids or more, so it was quite a change. So
And did the town kids ever say anything to you about, I don't know, growing up on a farm? Did they ever, what did
no,
they feel about farm kids?
they, I mean, we'd tell them what kind of chores we had to do, and they were like surprised that, well, you got to milk cows and stuff like that, but they really didn't know much about that. So, but it was, they'd listen. It was interesting to them. So
And was it a long trip into Killdeer?
about 15, 20 minutes with the bus. So
The bus. Um, and after school, would you come straight home to
had to
do
come
work?
home and milk the cows and do whatever else my dad had lined up for me to do the chores, get everything carry the coal in for the night. And
And so what was a typical day like here at the house?
well, you got up in the morning and done your chores, milked the cows, and in wintertime you had to feed them and get the coal in and feed the pigs and the chickens because they were locked up all winter. And in summer, well, you just open the chicken coop and let them out. And milked your cows too and put them out, chased them to the pasture, whichever one that they went to, because there was some pasture that was about a mile west of the place here, so they had to be chased up there and then gotten at night time again, so for milking again. So
Were you usually the one who had to go get the cows and bring them back?
yes, I did quite a bit of it after I grew up and my sisters were gone. It was my job to get them and see to it that they were here for milking time. So
And what were your parents like? What was your father like? You said he always had something lined up for you.
oh yeah, I enjoyed my parents, and they, I mean, like I guess like most farm kids, you had your chores and you knew what you had to do, and he expected you to go do it when it was time to go do it. So
And what was your father's name?
Frank,
And where was he born?
in Russia.
In Russia? Do you know where in Russia?
No, not exactly. I mean, back then it was just said from Russia, and
Hmm.
that's all.
Did he ever did he ever talk about the old country?
A little bit, yes, but basically, I guess they always said that the reason that they came over here was because there was talk of war over in Russia, and so him and his well, my grandpa and his family, and then there was some of my grandpa's brothers. They had came over, and one of my grandpa's brothers, came over a few months before the rest of them did, and he homesteaded around Grassy Butte. So, and then when the rest of the brothers and the family all came, and he sort of knew where they came to Dickinson, and then those from Grassy Butte, well, they sort of brought them out here, and then they had to homestead and find their little corner, I guess, that they wanted to live on. So
And that's why so when your father came, everything was pretty much set for the area he would settle.
right. Actually, my grandpa's the one that homesteaded right across the road over there. So
Okay.
my dad was 9 years old when they came over. So
Okay. So he may not have quite as many stories as say your grandfather did.
right.
Did you know your grandfather?
Very little. I think, about 4 or 5 years old when he passed away. So
And what was his name?
Valentine.
Valentine. And what about your grandmother? Was she still alive for a while?
No, she died about 4 years before I was born.
Okay. Did your sisters ever tell you any stories about them?
Mm, a few, I guess, where my grandpa used to sit well, the last few years before he died, he moved in with my parents, and he'd sit at the table and was smoking his cigarettes and was looking out of the window, and when they'd come in, he'd like tell them and ask them what all that they were doing and helping out with. So
So he was a frequent visitor before he moved in then, since
yes,
they lived right
they
across the
just lived
street.
across the road over here. So.
And what compelled your father to move in across the street and build his homestead here?
When he got married, and he had to get his own place, and so there was land over here, so he bought it from, I guess back then, from the county, because it was taken back from taxes. So and it was available, so he just started building up over here, and that's how he got started.
And when were he and your mother married?
And in November of 1927,
Okay.
November 23rd, 1927.
And so they lived here for how many years?
Well, my mother passed away in what was it, 1969, and then my dad passed away in September of 74. So
Did they live here
yes,
until their death?
yes.
And was it natural, or did they have any medical
Well, my
complications?
dad died from cancer, and my mom had a weak heart, and she had gallstone surgery, and her heart was too weak to take it. So
And where are they buried?
right across the road over here at St. Edward's Cemetery.
St. Edward Cemetery. And um, were your parents religious individuals?
Yes, we were Catholic, and the country church was just a mile north of here.
And how often would you attend services?
Every week, every Sunday. At the beginning, it was every Sunday, and then later on, we had mass every Saturday night here. So
And did you ever attend, were there any religious activities that you would attend?
mostly just, well, there was like summer school, sister summer school in the summer of the year, the beginning of June, and then there was a family picnic usually, over the summer, and then in the fall, they'd usually have one card party that the Lady Fidelity had, and there was always some entertainment with around. So
And what were those picnics like?
they were fun. The kids, we all played softball together, and actually a regular summer fun day of picnicking. So
Would they make any special food for that?
yeah, it was potluck. Every family brought whatever they liked. My family usually was asked to bring potato salad because we were pretty well known in the community for the German potato salad that we made. After my mom passed away, I made it too for a number of years, and there was a lot of neighbors that when they came, make sure you make some of your potato salad. So
So that's something you were able to take from your mother
right,
is her potato salad.
right.
What about any other foods that she would cook here that you remember?
Well, I made chicken noodle soup too, and I baked bread from scratch. The neighbor lady came over and taught me how to bake bread after she passed away. And there was when my sisters would come home with their families and all, and several times I had some uncles and aunts that came out, and I cooked for like 40 people on a Sunday. So,
How long would that take you?
well, usually I'd put the soup on in the morning, and the potato salad I a lot of times made the day before, but then the meat and all had to be. Sometimes we just put a ham in the oven, or made like pork chops or something like that, and well, it would take about an hour, hour and a half in the morning to get it all prepared and put it on the stove. And
What about the chicken? You said chicken noodle soup was a big thing. Did they have to go out and butcher the chicken?
yes, I had to go out and catch the chicken and scald the feathers off and clean it all out and gut it and cut it all up and put it in the kettle and make soup. So
How long would that take?
usually about half hour probably till you had it all done and ready. Half hour, 45 minutes to get it all done, ready to put in the kettle. So
Would it take you long to catch any of the chickens?
no, they were usually in the coop, and we had a long wire with a hook on there, and you just go in and usually try to catch a pretty good sized bigger one that was fat. They made good chicken noodle soup. So
Now, so besides chicken noodle soup, what other kinds of dishes would your mother put
she made
together?
she made soup noodles, and
And what's that?
it's a dough it's made out of dough, and then they cut it into little pieces like that. She'd tear a piece off and roll it in her hands and put it in her little roaster, and it was cooked, and it was real delicious. So as well as they made ram noodle, and that's also made out of dough and rolled out, and then there was cream put in there and raisins and rolled up and cut into sections, and we cooked like that too. So
Now, did your family, you said, of course, they raised cattle and some pigs. Did they do their own butchering?
yes, we did.
And what was that process like? Can you describe that?
The major thing was we butchered a lot of pork, and in the fall of the year there was always plenty of pork butchered for the whole year, and we made sausage, and you had your smoked hams, and as well as bacon, and not too much bacon because my dad rather had ham and sausage, so that was his primary meal. So
So what was a typical meal
meat and
here?
potatoes and home baked bread. My mom baked the bread, and it was always real good and delicious. And after she passed away, when I learned how, I was well noted in the neighborhood for my bread too that I baked. So
So you picked up a lot of those skills while you were
yes,
there.
I did. So
And what do you remember most about your mother?
she was very, how should I say, enjoyable. She liked to joke and laugh, and which is basically, I think, where I got it from. I like to do the same thing. I like to joke and laugh and have fun. So she'd like to, when her brother would come out, for example, he came out one time and he opened the door and threw his cap in to the kitchen, and she took the cap and threw it back out. And he said, well, can I come in? And she said, why not? He said, well, you threw my cap out. She said, well, you threw it in first. So she, like I said, she liked to laugh and enjoy it and have fun with everything.
And what are there any other fun stories that you remember growing up that I don't know, maybe you got in trouble for something and your mom would do something about it? And was she a strict parent?
No, not. I can't say that my parents were strict. I mean, I knew if they looked at me, you knew that you had to behave. You couldn't go do all kinds of things. So, but they were not mean or nothing like that. It was my dad had a look on his face that when he looked at you, you knew you better be sit down and behave. And they never really were mean or hollered at me that much or nothing because I knew enough to behave myself when he looked.
And what was it like being the youngest with all of your sisters there?
Well, my youngest sister was actually the only one I remember much because, as I said, my oldest sister got married when I was 3 weeks old, and my second one got married when I was about 2.5 years old. So with the youngest sister, I remember she used to like to tease me and pick on me too. So there was a lot of fun and enjoyment with that too. So
So what kind of things would you and what was your sister's name? Your younger sister's name?
Catherine.
What would you and Catherine do on a typical day?
Well, basically, we did our chores, and then back then we didn't have electricity yet or nothing, so it was just sit around and read storybooks and stuff like that. So
Would you read to one another?
no, usually she had her own book that she'd read or something, and I had a book or something, or we got the local newspaper, the Kildare Herald, and we'd sit there and read on that. So
And what about, getting out the Bible or something? Was that something your parents would do, or was that just reserved for church and
that was mostly just
tradition?
reserved for church. I mean, it was discussed and what all we had, and I mean, we knew our religion, went to summer school and all, but on the side of that, we pretty much knew what our religion was and what we could do and what we couldn't do.
Um, and in this house, I want to talk about the house just a little bit more since it is quite a unique structure. Um, how long uh, would it take to build a house like this? Do you know how long it took your parents to build
Well,
this home?
it was built in sections.
Okay.
This bottom part and then the next part was built first, and that took pretty much like one summer. And then as the family grew, there was another room added on, and the last room was added on, I think, in '63 when we got electricity, because then they got a deep freeze and all, and there was no room to put the freezer, so that's when the entryway there was added on. So
And that's where they put the freezer?
right.
And was that the kitchen then after that?
No, the kitchen was still separate in from there, but this was just like washing machine was in there, and the refrigerator or the deep freeze and the uh, cream separator and stuff like that. So
And how did your mother cope with not having electricity until 63?
basically, like my dad always said, when they got married and came out and moved out here and moved over here and started building up, this was supposed to be a temporary home for them till they could afford to build something else. But then the Depression years came along, the early 30s, and there was no crop and nothing. So, and as by the time he could really afford to build something better, he said, well, if I lived in this all these years, I might as well just finish my life out in here. And as time went on, it became a little more popular tourist place. So we had people from a lot of different states stopping and visiting, and so it was starting to get to be something new and more spectacular, I guess. So
So it was becoming quite the unusual home at that
yes,
point.
yes, it was.
And did your mother struggle with not having, say, a washing machine or a refrigerator or such for a long time?
Not that I really know of, because she never really said anything about it. Well, she did have a like a Maytag washing machine with a gas motor under there, but then after we got electricity, she got an electric one. So
What about a telephone? Did your parents have a telephone?
yes, we did, but we got that I think in 1968, 67, 68, right in there, when I was going to school in Kildare. Then there was a phone put in because they didn't know if you had to call home from school or if the buses had to leave early or something like that. Then they had to notify the parents that the kids were coming home. So that's when we put a phone in. So
So it was quite a bit later than say most homes in the area that had a
yes,
telephone. What about, say, the radio? Did your parents listen to the radio at all?
yeah, there was a power pack, and back in them days, it was a battery, and well, they put it on, like listen to the news, and then the hospital notes were on there, and basically it wasn't played all that much because then the battery would die out and you'd have to go buy a battery. So it was just put on for certain occasions. They had some like Western shows on there back then, and they'd listen to that, or like I said, the hospital notes and stuff like that, or the local news for the day or something. They'd listen to it once in the morning and probably like once in the evening, see what all took place. But it wasn't really left on much for music throughout the day or something like they do nowadays. So
So it was basically just out of listening to news and fun programs, not so
right,
much for fun
right.
as, say, music. Now let's take a walk and see a different side of this home you grew up in.
All right.
Where are we walking to?
This was the entryway. This was the last part that was added on.
And how long before this was added on? What year was this?
This was in about 1963.
1963. And that's when you said your family got electricity, right?
Yes,
And I see over here we have the electricity pole or the lamp.
yes, there was a yard light on there.
And how long did it take them to build this addition here?
This was done probably in about 6 weeks, I guess,
6 weeks?
because the rocks were originally taken from over by from my grandpa's place, where the barn and the granary had like fallen apart. So my dad and I, we just went over there and hauled the rocks over here and started building it up from here. Then instead of like go and getting them from the hills, like what my dad had to do when he built the rest of the buildings. So
And how long would it take to build a roof like this?
the roof was usually done in about 2 days.
And what did you have to use?
They used like your timbers like this that were put across, and then there was like straw put on, and then brush, and then your loose dirt that was put on there as a covering. So
Did the dirt fall through at all
no,
to
no,
the floor? It never did?
no,
So it was a pretty thick roof then.
right. Like inside, that's where those lid covers came in at. There was like cardboard nailed across with those lid covers so that it wouldn't pull through the nail, and nothing came through from that. It was all just held up there real good then. So
So those lids were placed over the nails.
right, the nail was placed through the center of the lid, and that sort of like acted like a washer,
Okay.
that it couldn't pull the paper, the cardboard through.
And so the ceiling was cardboard. Where did you find the cardboard?
Underneath, yes. And then there was like ceiling
Cloth.
wallpaper or like cloth taped or glued over the top of it. They made like a homemade glue, and then it was like ceiling paper put on there. So
Would it take long to put that part of the ceiling on?
no, usually they could do about a room a day. So
Well, let's walk a little bit farther here. And I'm assuming they put this up in 1963
yes,
when they did the rest of the electric
yes.
here at the house. And how
The,
long did it take them to wire the house?
it took about, I'd say altogether, probably about a week to 10 days, because my brother-in-laws helped, and they had to, actually it was, they had to put the wire in as you see there, and it went along the beam. The main wire was nailed up along the beam, and then along the wall beam, there's no wood or nothing on there. They had to dig little trenches through there, and then they put the wire in there and nailed it in, and then put oilcloth over it and painted it so you couldn't even see where the wires were or anything like that. So
And what is this room here?
this was the kitchen.
This one was the kitchen.
Yes,
And this is the room where they had the freezer.
yes.
And what else did they put in this room?
Well, there was the washing machine and the separator, cream separator was in there, and a little coat rack where we hung our coats up for the winter. And well, then there was, we carried the water
And
from across the road.
how far was that?
Oh, I'd say probably about 1,000 feet. I think 1968, it was piped over 600 feet. But you still had to carry it across the road over here, crawl up the ditch on one side and down the other side. So
What was that like during the winter?
it got a little hectic sometimes because the ditch was full of snow, and you came with two pails of water, and you step on the snow, and sometimes you'd break through the snow, and the water would spill, and well, you come up with only half of what you left the spring with. So
Did it ever freeze before you got it back home?
no, it didn't take that long to really walk, so it never froze. And then in the entryway here too, we just had a bunch of galvanized pails, and it would stand in the pails because you had your drinking water, which was put in two different enamel pails, and then any water that was used to wash dishes or for cooking purposes or anything like that, we had to carry it all. That was standing in pails. And then later on, I'd say from about from about 64, 65, we'd had a bunch of cream cans, and then we just go over and fill up all the cream cans and haul it over, and then we just used it out of the cream cans, especially in summertime, so because it wouldn't freeze, you could leave it outside. So
Now the cream cans, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the cream and the cream separator. Was that electrified, battery powered, or
just
was that
hand,
a motor? That was all hand.
just all hand. You had to.
Did you have to do that a lot?
Yes, I did.
And what was that like?
Enjoyable. You milked your cows and brought it up and separated the cream and fed your calves. And the cream was used for cooking. My mom did a lot of cooking with cream, as well as what was extra was sold for groceries. So
And you, of course, your family had chickens. Would your mother sell eggs with
yes,
the cream?
yes.
And where would you go to sell those?
Mostly it was taken to Killdeer. After when I was around and growing up, they were taken to Killdeer, and you'd buy your groceries and it paid some of the grocery bill as well as the cream check too. So
And how did your family travel to and from town?
with a car.
And when did they get the first car?
Well, they had Model T. They had a Model T, but the first car that I remember that I grew up with was they had a DeSoto, a 1946 DeSoto, and we had that till I think 1968 until my dad came home one day from Kildare and he told my mom, well, what do you think about this car? I think it was a 67 Dodge. And then we had that for a while, and then he traded that in and got another little Mercury Meteor. And that was All they were all used cars, but they all worked real good and got us to where we were going. So
And what was the first car you drove out here?
the first one I drove would that well, I guess it would have been the that Mercury Meteor that we had.
Okay. What about farm machinery? Did your parents have any farm machinery?
Yes, they did. Try well at the beginning of in the early years when they moved over here and got married, they it was all done with horses. And then as time went along, my dad bought a tractor and yep, disc and drill and a plow and cultivator, and that's how basically how all the farming was done. There wasn't that big of a farm. I mean, there was not. Well, he planted about 80 acres of wheat and probably usually about 40 acres of oats. So.
How long would it take to harvest that many acres?
Well, we had custom combiners come in. Back in the earlier days, that was all binder, and then they had to thrash, which there was a thrashing crew, and then they'd go from neighbor to neighbors to harvest the crop. And in later years, we had custom combiners come in.
Okay.
Usually in about a day or two,
They'd be
our
done.
crop was done usually.
And where would those be sold?
Was taken to the elevator either in Kildare or in Dickinson. Whichever had room, there was enough seed wheat put in the granary for the next season, and the rest was taken to the elevator. But there was a lot of gumbo and stuff, so there wasn't always the greatest crops when I grew up. If it didn't rain, there was no crop, but if it did rain with all the gumbo, it dry up and get hard.
Alex, what is this structure behind us?
There was a barn and a little granary. The bottom end here was a little granary, and then there was a barn where all the milking was done in.
And how many cows?
I milked 3 cows from the time when I quit school and all till my parents died. There we had 3 milk cows that I milked.
But the rest were all cattle or
The
beef
rest were
cattle.
all range cattle. But there was just 3 milk cows.
And the land behind us, was that also part of your father's land?
Yes, it was.
And was that also used for grazing?
Yes, some of it was farmland and some was grazing. The pasture was more or less these hills to the west and northwest here, and that pasture goes back about a mile.
And did you usually spend a lot of time in the barn here?
Yeah, in the mornings milking usually for about a half hour, 45 minutes. The same thing in the evenings, and in the summertime when there was your flies and all, it would be quite a task to try to sit under the cows, milk by hand, and with them swatting their tails back and forth, chasing the flies. So.
Now, other than the milk cows, we had chickens.
Yes,
And what is this building over here?
that is the chicken coop, which was built, oh, I suppose in the late 50s. Because I remember I was going to school already, and I came home and my dad was building it, had started building it, and when I came home I said that, well, I learned how to read this or that today, and he said, well, that's good, pretty soon you'll be learning how to read the newspaper, so, and he was just starting to build this that day.
And did you have a lot of chickens?
Probably about 30, 40 of them, as well as there was hens that usually came in the spring of the year with little chicks, and sometimes my parents would buy some little baby chicks, and they were raised up that way. So
And would your mother can any chicken meat for the winter, or was it always fresh?
I don't really know too much that she did can it. I never really heard that much about it, but usually being we had the chickens, I mean, they were just butchered as we needed it. So
Was it your mom saying, Alex, go out and catch a chicken?
pretty much so. If she decided to make chicken for dinner today, well, in the morning you were sent out to go catch a chicken and butcher it, and within an hour or so it was in the frying pan being chicken fried, and she used to make lots of good cream gravy with the cream that we had from milking, so they were always real good, delicious meals.
And how old were you the first time you had to go out and catch a chicken?
Oh, probably about 7, 8 years old.
Okay. Now, Alex, what is this building that we're standing in front of?
This was a garage as well as a butcher shop. The lower part was a chicken coop at the beginning, which was later when that one that we just talked about was built. This one was turned into like a little coal shed. When we put the coal in there, then they didn't dry up as bad and as fast and quick. So.
Now, did you store a lot of it in this shed here? In the
Yeah, there
garage?
was a good big truckload that used to go in there. So
And it would last you all winter, or would you have to refill?
we had to usually buy another load or so. At the beginning, my dad used to mine his own coal, but as years went on and he got older, then it was bought. So, but it, as a young kid when I grew up, I remember he mined it himself right out of the bank from that big bank over here. That was a coal mine. They took the dirt from there to make the farm to market road here.
Okay.
And then, well, the coal was pretty much, he had to do a little more uncovering, but most of it was uncovered. So it was, and then like I said, as the years went on and he got a little older the last few years, then the coal were bought. So.
And what other kinds of things would you use to store in this garage?
Well, it was actually when there was like baby pigs born, the car had to be out, and we'd put like 2 little pens in there, and you'd have your pigs born in there. And in winter, well, it was usually like in March or so. Well, it was cold outside, so then there was a heater put up to heat it, as well as after we had electricity, then there was heat lamps put on there, so that to keep them warm, and it was used, like I said, for butchering purposes too.
And how long was the butchering process for the pigs?
Usually about 2 days. One day to butcher them all and cut it all up, and then the next day sausage was made and all. Then sometimes about the third day, the hams were smoked and wrapped up and put in the freezers then. So.
And can you describe the process that they use to butcher the pigs?
Well, as I grew older and helped, you'd go up and shoot the pig and stab it, and usually there was like blood saved because we made blood sausage and all, and was taken down, and the younger ones they'd scald them, and the older ones, I mean, most of the time my dad would just make sausage out of the older ones, the yearling ones. So, and then that was just skinned and cut up and ground up and made sausage out of it. So.
And how did they make sausage?
Well, he put like, it was put in like a tub and then mixed up, and there was like salt and pepper in there and garlic juice, and it was put salt and pepper in to taste really, because one of the neighbors always laughed and said my dad would put pepper in there till it was black on top, and my dad said, well, that's the way I like it. So.
And how much sausage would they make?
Oh, pound wise, I guess maybe probably close to about 50, 75 pounds of sausage, because my dad didn't have very good teeth, and so most of the time that's why he made a lot of sausage, because Daddy could eat pretty good. So.
And did you store any of the family cars in this garage?
Yes, we did. When there was nothing going on in there, then the car was in there throughout the winter or summer. So.
Anything else you want to add about this building before we move on?
No.
Okay.
And as well as a washboard.
Mm-hmm.
But then later on in years, she got a Maytag washer with a gas motor on it. And then after we got electricity, then it was an electric washing machine. So.
Did she ever say how much time that saved her?
Oh yes, it was a lot easier on her and faster and quicker. Usually within about, after we had electricity ones, it was usually in about 4 hours. About the water was the clothes were washed. It all had to be heated up on the coal stove in the kitchen first, and then carried out and dumped in the washing machine, and then the clothes were all washed, brought out here and hung up on the clothesline to dry. So.
And how long, before she got the washing machine, how long would it take her to do laundry?
I'm not really sure because that was before my time. I don't really remember. So
Okay. Well, there are two small buildings back here. Can you tell us what the one in the back is?
that one back there was my grandpa's outhouse, which was brought over here and used as an oil shed. There was like your greases and oil and everything was put in there. And then this one here was the outhouse that I grew up using. So
Was it always in that location?
no, it was back a little farther. About every 3, 4 years, it was moved just far enough down that there was a new hole dug and moved down farther. So
And what kind of things would they use for toilet paper?
old catalogs, newspapers, stuff like that. If like a box of peaches were bought or something, well then those little papers that would come in the box of peaches that was used as toilet paper then. So, but mostly I'd say old magazines. So.
Okay. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about um, your daily life in the house. What kind of system did your parents have as far as bathing the children? Was it how frequently would they say you need to have a bath?
Oh, usually back then, I guess when I grew up, most of the time probably about twice a week. Usually on the weekend, like for church or something, and then about the middle of the week again. But when I went to school, you had to take a few more, once or two more. But as the general rule, it was probably about two a week. So,
And how did they determine who got to bathe first?
well, basically I don't know because, like I said, by the time I was born, my older sisters were gone. So when I grew up, I was pretty much all by myself already. So it was just my sister and I, and well, I guess whoever was told to go take their bath first is the one that went. So.
And how often were you told to brush your teeth?
That wasn't too big of a ordeal. I mean, I didn't grow up brushing my teeth all that much. So, well, once in a while we did, yes, but it was not on a daily basis. So
And what did they use for toothpaste?
there was some toothpaste bought, but as well as also I remember my sisters talking about that they use soda,
Okay.
baking soda. So
Um, and as far as the clothes you wore, what would you wear on just a normal day?
just a pair of jeans and usually a old shirt. If they were like the better ones were when they were bought, they were used for weekends, like for church or go to town or something. And as they got older, that's what you used for doing chores then and wearing throughout the week.
And what were your clothes all store bought, or did your mother make any of them?
When I grew up, they were all store bought. Probably in the earlier days when after they got married, some of them were homemade. But when I grew up, it was mostly just store bought.
Okay. Any stories about these outhouses that you'd like to share?
Not really so much for me. I know my sister's got some stories to say about it, and my understanding you will be interviewing with them, so I guess I'll just let them tell you about it. So,
Well, what was it like for you going from using an outhouse to a regular bathroom?
well, it was quite a exciting experience for me when I was able to go in there and you didn't have to worry like in wintertime when it was 30 below outside. You came out here and used this one. You didn't stay out here any longer than you absolutely have to.
And what would they do during blizzards? I mean, how did you manage that?
Usually, most of the time, if it was halfway possible, we'd have to go out and use it outside.
Alex, what is the building we're standing in front of?
This was a granary, which was used to store the grain in after harvesting. You put your seed wheat in there for the next year, as well as there was usually a fanning mill in there, as well as my dad used to buy in the fall of the year flour for the whole year. So there was like a 50-gallon barrel standing there with some beams like across what's on the house there. They were laid across, and your flour was laid on top of there with cardboard put over the top, and that's was stored in there and was well taken care of. The mice or nothing got to it, so
So that system worked out pretty well.
yes, it did.
And what is the difference between this granary and the one we saw before?
Well, that one down there had like your feed oats in that was used to feed the pigs and all. And this one here was just like for saving the seed wheat and something like that. So.
Okay. Well, anything interesting about this building that you would like to add?
Not really so much about this one. It was mostly the garage up there because you done your butchering in there, and the vehicles were in there, as well as any work that had to be done on a piece of equipment. We usually just pull it up in front of the door there and work on it right there. So.
Okay. Now, Alex, this is the back side of the main house. Why is there a difference here in the stone between this part and then the part farther down?
Actually, like the other part that had cement on it, and this here, from what I can remember, it sort of washed off, and in the later years, my dad was a little too sick to really try to replace it, so that's why you can see the rocks more on this end than you can on the rest of the house. So.
Okay. And I see these beams coming out of of course, the roof line here. Where did the family get the beams to build the roof?
They came from a timber creek about 3/4 of a mile to the west of here from our pasture.
So you went out, cut them,
Yes.
and how did you haul them back here?
Usually they were like laid on the wagon and hauled, or that's basically how I know how they got them here, was they loaded them up on a wagon, and when we done fencing, that was done the same way. We went back and chopped the trees down and loaded them up on the wagon, and then they were used like for fence posts.
So was that a very treed, very wooded area?
Yeah, through that creek there was quite a few and number of trees there, and then there'd always be some more growing always, so there was always plenty of trees. So.
And how often would you have to replace the roof? Did they ever replace it?
No, it was just that the dirt had to be put on about every 2-3 years, but the roof itself, there was nothing done with it as all the years I was here. So.
And what is this part of the house here?
This one, well, originally, it started out like as a little living room deal, because the next room up was a kitchen, and then, as I said, when the family started getting older, well, then the real living room that it was used after I grew up was added on, and this became a bedroom. So.
Okay. And farther down, that was the kitchen at the far end.
Yes.
And then the bedrooms in the middle.
The kitchen, and then the living room, and then there was 2 bedrooms. So.
Okay. Alex, what is this room?
This was the kitchen.
And pink walls, is that the last color it was painted before your mother left?
Yes. Well, actually, after my mother passed away, my dad and my sisters and brother-in-laws helped paint the whole house, and this was the last color that it was painted.
And what was that structure over there behind
This
you?
right here was the chimney.
What was the chimney?
As there was a coal stove sitting right here.
And what about this corner?
Usually there was the kitchen table, and there was the like bench sitting across the back, as well as your chairs. And
what do you remember about this room?
as I just stand here right now and look at it, I can't believe how small it looks. And good gracious, all the people that we had in here, and how many people would sit around and eat. And there was still room, and now you look at it, how small it looks. So.
And what was the rest of the setup for this room?
Usually right over here we had a little table where the dishes were always washed. There was a cupboard. And actually right here there was an electric stove sitting. In that corner was a refrigerator.
And I see the electric wires running through. Is this where they had the fuse box?
Yes, the fuse box is right up here.
And on the ceiling, we were talking a little bit earlier about the can lids and how they were used to hold up the cardboard ceiling. And there are quite a few still in use in this room.
Yes, that was, like I said, the lid was used like something like a washer, and there was a nail put through the middle of it and nailed up to the beams, and that held the cardboard up. As well as right here, this is like some of the ceiling paper that was put over the top of it.
And how often would they have to replace those can lids?
The lids were actually not replaced as long as I can remember.
And did they ever have a problem with rain leaking through onto the cardboard?
Oh, there was a few times where I remember one time where there was a real heavy rain and it did wash a lot of the dirt off, and then there was a little small leak, but which my dad went out then the next day and got some dirt and threw it back up, and that took care of it for the next time it rained hard. So
Alex, which room are we standing in here?
this was the living room.
And how is furniture set up in this room?
This corner right here had a writing desk in it, and then there was a rocking chair and a couch, another rocking chair, and then there was a coal heater sitting here, and then some regular just sitting chairs along this wall. Oh, there was a dresser along the corner, across the corner, and then two chairs. And then over here, there was a little stand in the corner down here that had the radio on it. There was a big round oak table standing here with some regular chairs around, and then in the corner there was the TV as of after we had electricity when I grew up. So.
And there are a couple of windows in this room. What did they use for the windows? They used glass?
Yeah, there was glass in there with a regular, like a cross frame in there. So
is this where visitors would congregate when they came to visit?
yes, and then there was like a name stay party usually in December. My dad's name was Frank, and so Saint Francis or Frank, that was on December 3rd, and I remember there was a lot of neighbors would always come, and there was a lot of card playing going on in here as well as in the kitchen. And once again, I have to say it, when you stand here now, it looks so small. And I remember there were some times where there was like 4 tables of cards in here and 2, 3 tables in the kitchen being played. And now you just look, where the hell did that happen? So.
And is this the same room where you would celebrate other holidays?
Mostly,
like
yes.
Christmas?
Yes.
And how would they do anything to this room for Christmas?
No, not too much. We had a little nativity scene that was put up usually in the corner over here around the TV. And outside of that, there was just the regular Christmas dinner, and which when I grew up and got older once, and my sisters were gone, well, they'd come sometime throughout the holidays. But it didn't necessarily mean they were going to be here on Christmas Day, so it depended on the weather and all.
Alex, is this the main beam here for the house?
This was one similar to what my dad had in here, but the one that my dad had in here was like, it had 4 sides, and it was like a little varnished and all. And then there was like 2 coat hangers hanging on here, which one side he'd have his coat on, and the other side usually had his hat hanging on there. So.
And what about the roof? Was this the only beam for this room?
Yes. And the only reason why it was really put in was because it was a little bigger room than the rest, so they figured it should have a little support in the middle. So.
Mm-hmm. Alex, what is this room?
This one is, when I grew up in here, this was a bedroom. But as I said, originally when my dad started building it, this was like the kitchen.
And was this your bedroom?
No, this was my parents' bedroom.
And do you remember how the furniture was set in this room?
Yes, there was a heater in that corner, and this is the chimney also. And there was a bed along the wall here, and a clothes closet in this corner, and a Singer sewing machine in this corner, and a dresser right there.
Alex, what can you tell us about this room?
This was a bedroom, and there was also a bed over there, and a dresser right by the window here. Another bed across here, another clothes closet over here, and then a trunk that was used for storage right across there, and then a little dresser right against the door there.
And is this the room that you spend a lot of your time in?
Yes, it is. This is where I slept in, and also done some of my homework in here, as well as in the living room. And when we had company, my nieces, nephews, and all, this is, especially wintertime, this is where we'd be in and visit and play cards or something like that, or games, whatever we were playing and doing. So
Alex, where are we standing?
this is St. Edward Cemetery.
And what is the significance of St. Edward Cemetery?
The church was a mile north here, and then there was 1 acre of land from what my dad owned, and an acre from what the neighbor straight to the east here owned. And the original, that was before my day, one of their children had died, and it was brought up and buried in the corner of their land up here, and basically that's how this cemetery started.
Do you know what year that was?
Oh, I'd say probably back in the mid-20s, probably, because I know my parents got married in 23, and I wouldn't know exactly what year, but it was, I'd say, in the mid-20s probably.
And you have several family members that are buried in the cemetery. I'd like to
Yes,
talk first about your grandmother, Frances Hutmacher.
yes, this one here was my grandma and my grandpa, and which, like I said, she died 4 years before I was born. And it was basically I just heard stories about her, and I seen pictures, but outside of that, I didn't really know her. So,
And what kind of stories did you hear about her?
uh, about the same as like with my parents. She was a good cook, and they homesteaded right across the road over here, and they had, I guess, a family of 8 kids their own. And when they came over from Russia, there was some children died in infancy from diphtheria and all. So, but I guess she was a good cook too, and her, from all I ever was told knew, was that they had, when they had company and all, they all liked her meals too, just like my mother's. So,
Did your mother ever cook anything that your grandmother used to make?
well, like I said, I suppose like those soup noodles and ram noodle and stuff like that. That was a old German homemade dough dish that it was pretty well known for almost every German family that would cook and eat. So,
Now, did your grandmother pass away due to natural causes, or how did
yes,
she?
she was in the Dickinson Hospital, which at that time there was no telephones or nothing, and they had called Fayette, and then back then they had like a old crank telephone, I guess, in Fayette, and they got a call there, and then they had like a messenger there that would go around and deliver messages, and the messenger was told that they could come over and come in and pick up my grandma from the hospital. And by the time this messenger got back over to Fayette, the call had already come out that she had passed away. So then they came back over and told my grandfather and my dad that she had passed away, that they were supposed to come in and make funeral arrangements and things like that, I guess.
Now, I'd like to also talk a little bit about your grandfather, Valentine. Now, Alex, we're standing at the grave of your grandfather, Valentine Hutmacher. When did he come to the United States?
They came over in 1911. They landed in Dickinson on Thanksgiving Day. And back then, my dad said the story many a times that there was a lot of snow back when they came, and like my uncle, my great uncle, Lucas Hutmacher, buried right behind us here, he was already living in Grassy Butte area, and when they came in to meet the family and bring them out, they had to come with horses and sleighs. Everything was so full of snow already that they couldn't hardly move around, which back then there wasn't these roads that we have nowadays either. So
What do you remember about your grandfather?
Basically, well, he died in 1954, which I'd have been 4 years old. I remember him like sitting in our house and sitting at the living room table, and he'd be just rolling his handmade cigarettes and smoking and looking out of the window and visiting with us with myself and all. But the actual remembering him that much, I don't. It's just stories that my parents had told me about him and all. So.
Do you can you recall any of those stories?
Well, let me think a minute here. Well, I remember, like, for example, which we had talked about before, was like a winter time when it was cold and they went out to the outhouse. He went out one time and it didn't take long and he come in and my dad said, boy, that was sure fast. And he says, well, if you want to stay out there much longer when it's so cold, that's up to you. I was out there long enough. So, and it was basically just like regular comedy stories too, just like everybody else, I guess. So.
Did your mother ever say what it was like having her father-in-law living in the same house with her there
Mm,
when he was older?
not that I remember. Nothing really was said about it. So.
And what would your father tell you about what kind of man your grandfather was?
From what a lot of the neighbors and all had said was that he had a very low voice, and which a lot of people were sort of scared when he spoke because he spoke in a very low, loud voice. But like I said, I don't really remember it. So.
Do you remember what he looked like?
In the later years when I grew up, in the pictures that I seen, he was bald and he had real thick, bushy eyebrows, and that's basically all I remember. Is because, like I said, I seen just mostly pictures of him. So.
And um, considering they moved here from Russia, did they speak German all through their lives?
Yes, German was basically the major language that we spoke. And I remember growing up as I got a little older, when my parents wanted to go to town, well, when I was going to school, well, can I go along? And my mom and dad would say, well, Grandma only speaks German and you can't speak German, so there's no need for you to go along. Well, it didn't take very long. I learned how to speak German so I could go along too when they went to town. So
Did it take you very long to learn it?
no, because my mom and dad spoke it on a regular everyday basis, so you just picked it up and learned this what they were saying, and you got to know what they were talking about and learned it that way. So
Any last comments about your grandfather?
mm, not that I can just think of.
Now, Alex, we're standing um, at the gravesite of one of your aunts.
Yes, this was my great aunt and my great uncle,
And what were their names?
Lucas Hutmacher and Serfina Hutmacher.
And what do you remember about your aunt Serafina?
Well, I was already married when she passed away, and she lived in Dickinson, and there was a number of times where when we went to town, we'd stop there and visit with her, and she always invited us to stay for a meal, and she was also a very good cook too. So, and more my dad and my mom would visit with her more than what I did because she was her her first husband passed away, and then she had gotten remarried, and he passed away too. So when I got to know her, she was a little older already, elderly, and it was back then. It was mostly the parents who done the talking with the older people than what the kids got to. So.
Well, let's move around and talk about your uncle here. And Lucas, what do you remember about Lucas?
Well, this was the one that, like I said, had homesteaded in the Grassy Butte area. And when my grandpa came over here, when they landed, he was the one that originally had come into town and picked them up. And from where they got off the train in Dickinson, and it was basically, I guess they just farmed out there too and all, and I got to know him a little bit, but not all that much either, because I was 6 years old when he passed away. So
Now, Alex, we're standing here with your parents, um, Frank and Veronica Hutmacher. Let's start with your mother. What do you remember the most about your mother?
her good meals that she cooked, as well as, like I said, her silly and friendly atmosphere of life that she always had. She always had a nice, funny joke about something or tease somebody about something, and that's basically how I got to know her and enjoyed her the most.
Was she able to keep up with you kids pretty well?
Yes, pretty much so, as far as I know. 'Cause like I said, till I was born, my sisters are all older than I am, and two of them were gone, and it was shortly after I grew up. But I mean, there was never no problems with family issues or anything like that. So
And what kind of a person was your mother?
very friendly and likable, and lovable too, and very happy-go-lucky, I guess you could say. So,
Was she a small woman?
uh, yes, a little smaller, a little heavier set. I'm not exactly sure how tall she was, but
And what happened there to your mother at the end?
well, she was in the Dickinson Hospital. Actually, it started out as like a gallbladder surgery, and her heart was too weak, and she made it through the surgery, but 2 days later she passed away because they said her heart was too weak for the surgery.
And you were how old then
18,
when your mother passed away?
yes, 18.
And you still lived at the family home?
Yes, I did.
For how long?
For 5 more years after that.
Were you there with
Actually,
your
10
father?
years. Actually, 10 years.
10 years.
Yes, I was there with my father, and then when he passed away, I was still alone out here for 5 years. Then after that, so
And what kind of a man was your father, Frank?
very lovable and kind too. Like I said, and you knew when he told you something that you better go do it, and as long as you went and done it, and was done it as fast and as quick as he expected you to, he was a very nice man, gentle and loving and kind too.
So you were never really disciplined
Not
physically as much as.
not that I could say that it was real mean or anything. No, it was a stern warning. When you were told something, it was a stern warning, which you knew that you better behave or you're gonna get into trouble. So
And your parents both spoke German?
yes, they did.
And did your father? I knew he was young when they came over from Russia. Did he tell you any stories about that
Uh,
journey?
Not so much then. Basically, I remember what they said was when they got on the ship over in Russia, they got on in the evening, and by morning they were out in the middle of the ocean, and when they looked around, you couldn't see nothing but water all over. So, and well, like I said, there was a lot of. My grandpa had lost some children in infancy from diphtheria, as well as there was a lot of other families on that ship that had lost children too, also from diphtheria and all. So
And how many children were in your father's family?
there was 8 children.
And how many of them made it across to the United States?
Well, actually, I think there was, 16 of them, and 8 of them passed away in infancy, and the other 8 were alive then after they were over here. So,
And did they all settle in this area?
well, at the beginning when they got married, yes, but as they lived on and all, some of them moved out. There was one in Belfield, and one down in Hirschfield, and one just east of Dickinson a little ways, and then one moved. One was in Kildare, and then they like sold out and they moved to Seattle, Washington. So, and then one of my dad's sisters was a nun, and she's still alive today. She's the only one of the family that's still alive, and she's in Dayton, Ohio, right now. So,
And were you close to your aunts and uncles?
yes, I remember visiting with them quite often, and they used to come too once or twice throughout the summer here, and we'd go to their place a time or two throughout the summer also. So,
And did you have a favorite aunt or uncle?
well, yes, from my mom's brother was more or less my favorite. He was my godfather, and he used to like to go fishing a lot. So he, a lot of times, would come out and take me along, go fishing with him, and as well as my dad. But if there was farm work to be done, well, several times my dad couldn't go along, so he'd just take me along, and I enjoyed that because that was my favorite uncle because he was my godfather. So
And what was his name?
Alex Nuss.
Alex Niss. And did
That's
you
where
live
I,
close?
yes, that's where I got my name from. Actually, that's who I was named after.
Okay.
So,
It makes sense that you were his. He was your godfather.
or yes.
Um, well, what about cousins? Were you close to any of your cousins?
Yes, there was some around here that, but actually, when I grew up, most of those from my dad's side, they were gone more. Those from around Dickinson and Hirschville area, I'd see them once in a while, but actually, I think I see them more now than I did back when when I lived out here. So,
Now I'd like to get back to your parents here for a second. Uh, did they ever talk about their wedding or anything like that when you were growing up?
sorta. Back then, when they got married, there was like the weddings, the meals were held in the home, and so they just basically they got married at St. Edward's Church, a mile north up here, and then the meal was held in my grandpa's home over here. And the neighbors were all invited as well as relatives. They had a back then there was dinner and supper served, and then they usually one of the neighbors or something would have a granary or something, and they'd have a little dance, and because my dad used to have his own little orchestra too, and a little band, and he played accordion, and he had a violin, and then there was some with that I guess that's basically what they did play was just mainly accordion and violin. So
And how did your father pass away?
he died from lung cancer,
And how old was he?
71.
71 years old. And what was his funeral like?
Well, sort of a sad, real sad day for me, as well as the day when my mother passed away. But when my dad passed away, I guess it was probably a little more serious and lonely for me because I knew then that I was going to be out here all by myself until I met someone that I cared for and we got married 5 years later. So